Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Hemmings Hot Rod BBQ. My name is Mike Musto, and on this episode, we have a very special guest by the name of Chris Smith. Now, Chris has a company called Mr. Smith, LLC, and he is an auction specialist, which is why this is our very special auction episode. Chris is going to go over why and what you have to do to buy a car at a live auction. Everything from logistics to what's the best day to put your car on the auction, to what you should look for, to how you could get in touch with an auction specialist, to what the fees are. This is really cool. This is a very educational episode. So I think you guys are going to enjoy it, especially if you've ever gone to a live auction. But before we begin, we always pick a car from our Hemmings Classifieds that kind of best personifies our guest. And as Chris is a Porsche guy, well, we've chosen something very special. The one that we've chosen is a 1997 Porsche 993 Turbo in Riviera Blue. And this car is basically a super survivor car, under 25,000 miles, 6-speed manual, 180-mile-an-hour top speed. But above and beyond that, the 993 was the last of the air-cooled Porsche 911s. Absolutely stunning car in every category, and something that you guys should take a look at it. So with that said, take a look at this stunning blue Porsche, and we'll be back in about 5 seconds with Mr. Chris Smith. Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Hot Rod BBQ podcast. As promised, I have Mr. Big Chris of Chris Smith LLC. Now, I wanted to bring Chris on because Chris is basically an auction expert. Started out in Europe, came to the United States, has done everything from auction prep to procurement to working with the auction houses as far as, sales and getting cars ready and so on and so forth. In short, he is steeped in every aspect of auction culture, and I wanted him to kind of dispel some of the myths that many of you might have about bringing your car to auction, selling a car at auction, buying a car from auction, and exactly what the process is to basically getting you the most money for whatever ride you might have. So, Chris, welcome to the barbecue. It's always good to see you, buddy.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
So let's start from a seller's perspective, right? So I'm here. I want to sell one of my cars at a live auction event, right? What is the first thing that I have to do from the moment that the light bulb pops in my head and says, well, I think I'm going to do this? How does that process work? Walk me through that.
Okay, so it's going to start basically with what are you selling? What product? What car or motorcycle? Because you're not going to put a $20,000 car in a $2 million auction. So you just got to do your homework, and common sense has a lot of answer for that. So, is it going to be a European classic? Is it going to be an American muscle car? You're just looking for an answer to a marketing question. Where best can I place my car to get the most amount of money out of it? And not just that, to have the biggest audience, the biggest demographic that's actually going to see the vehicle, because the more eyes that are in front of it, the more buyers, the more chance you have of achieving a better price for it. So I think once you've done that and you're going to figure out where it's going to go, that's half the battle. But, you've got to use a lot of common sense in this. If you're selling a $25,000 muscle car, you got to think to yourself, is this going to be worth it to me to put it through an auction? Because your buyers and sellers fees, once they're deducted as well as your entry fee, are you going to end up with the money that you actually want for the car? And, depending on which auction house you go with, you're going to be around 10% for the seller, as well as the entry fee for the vehicle itself. Then you've got your transport. Don't count the prep of the car before it goes, because you're obviously going to prep it before you sell it, whether it's in a classified or it's going to go to an auction. So, you do have those fees and costs incurred. And then you've got to decide, am I going to go and visit the auction myself and watch my car go through? Because you're going to be looking at plane tickets or, some road travel or what have you. Are you doing this just to make money, or are you doing it as a lifestyle event? There's different variables, but generally, if you want to throw some fun in, I would say go and enjoy the experience for sure.
Are people, when it comes to that percentage that you're giving to the auction house, right? Obviously, the auction has a lot of expenses, right? Especially if we're talking about a live event, right? They have,
Sure.
Brick and mortar locations, they have setup, they have tear down, they have personnel, they have catering, they have all of this stuff that helps make this auction kind of flow, right? So For those people that might have, say, that second gen Camaro or that third gen Camaro that might be, say, a $15,000 to $20,000 car, does it really make sense for them to go to an auction house? Because so I guess my question is, are they generally upset when they figure out all the fees involved? When they figure out, okay, it's 10% here, it's X amount of dollars for me to ship my car there, it's X amount of dollars for me to get a hotel room, pay for food, blah, 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 right? Do you find that, like, is there a dollar figure that you would put on a vehicle whereby you're like, it's just not worth me selling it at a public auction, whereby I should just sell it on my own through like a Craigslist or something like that?
I think that is a really, really good question. What's the threshold? Where do I start? Where do I stop? And I think in answer to your question there, the main thing is am I just taking one vehicle? Is it going to be that third generation Camaro? In answer to your question, I would say no, I wouldn't bother, because it's not going to turn enough. Probably the chances are to get you out of it. But if you're taking 5 or 6 vehicles, or 2 or 3, or 3 or 4, then you start playing the odds and you're looking at evening out, on an average, because one may not do so well and one may absolutely crush it, in which case it's just going to bring your grade point average up. So I think that you just need to look at the pros and the cons and how many units you're taking in that scenario. I think for me, sort of 25 grand is the minimum that you want to be putting a car into one of these auctions, because by the time you've taken those fees out of it, you're going to be near the knuckle on whatever it is. And generally that's the kind of money, the just cheaper end of the scale, if you will, that the auction houses achieve for some driver quality vehicles, if you will. They're generally a little bit more than that. But then again, if you're a buyer and you're looking at vehicles that are achieving 20, 22 grand, you've got to start asking yourself the question, why would someone put that vehicle in an auction?
Mm-hmm.
It could, is there a story? You just don't know. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose.
When it comes to that, as a buyer, right? So, and we've been to Barrett and been to all these other live auctions. How in depth can you really look over a vehicle? So if I go online and I go to one of the auctions and I say, okay, well, here is this, here's a 68 Charger, for instance. I really like it. Online, I've got photos, I've got a description, but you know what? I'd really like to check out the car in person and see what it's like mechanically and so on and so forth. Do you have, as a buyer, if you are attending the event, the opportunity to do that? And how much access do people really have to these vehicles before they raise their hand to actually bid, whether it's online or whether it's in person?
Sure, that's another excellent question. And just walking around, you see people behind barriers, or they're roped off areas, and you can't get in to see the cars. And do you want to spend 150 grand on that 1970s classic without looking at it? Great question.
Right.
In answer to it, the auction houses, it's in their interest to sell those vehicles, so their operatives are going to be as helpful as possible. So the best thing to do immediately is go and find one of the specialists. Speak to someone in one of their jackets, one of their uniforms, and say, look, I'm interested in lot number XXX. I want to look at this car. They will physically take you to that vehicle. They'll unrope it. You can do your checks. You can take a look at the car. You can crawl underneath it, inside of it, until your heart's content. Obviously treating it with respect. It's still someone else's property at that point in time. But you can actually get the measure of the vehicle very well. And I think that's more important, obviously, to be more hands-on and be at the event, or at least have a representative who's obviously a specialist in the vehicle that you're looking at purchasing. So in answer to your question, they're generally very, very helpful. I think, if you're going to an upper market event, if you will, and these things are roped off and they're more difficult to get to, I think it's more etiquette, if you will, to have had more time. So maybe a couple of days before the event, before general public are in there having a good time and walking around, to have made those checks and liaise with someone. But the auction house specialists themselves, they're not just there to sell cars on the physical day of the auction. They're there to help everybody, the seller and the prospective buyers, right up leading to the event, from weeks away from it. So don't be frightened to reach out.
So okay, so you have your auction house, you have the auction specialists. Is there an opportunity to actually speak to the owner of the vehicle? right? To say, listen, like if you speak to an auction specialist and you say, okay, I'd really like to speak to the owner of the vehicle. Will the auction houses let you do that? Or once you submit a car to the auction, do they say, okay, we've got it from here. You gave us the information that you think will sell your car. Do the owners, are they basically kept out of it? Or is it worth their while to actually stand with their car and be by them? So if people come up and have questions, they can talk to the person who's actually selling.
Okay, you got two questions there, and
Yep.
in answer to the first question, it's generally frowned upon that they will put you in touch with the owner. The auction house is receiving a fee to be the middleman for the deal to sell the car. They will be the go-between between you as a prospective client, as a purchaser, and the seller, the vendor of the vehicle. That being said, into the second question that you led into, then it's you can't, an auction house can't stop an owner standing by their own vehicle. They are a client of the auction house, and if they decide that they wish to represent their vehicle, so be it. Whether that helps or hinders, it's their vehicle. So a lot of people don't like to represent their own vehicles. That's why they're paying an auction house. They give all the paperwork and the information, and generally, it's not just inspecting the vehicle. Once you've spoken to a specialist, you can go to one of the offices with them, and they'll pull out the data file, all the receipts, servicing, whether it's had restoration, photographic history, and so forth. And that's generally, you're going to have a full team of people there with plenty of box files on site for you to go through, and they don't mind you sitting back there for as long as you want, hours on end, going through everything, making sure it's the car for you. So I think that's really important, that if you really are into a vehicle and you want to travel to see it, don't travel on the day. Go at least the day before or a few days before, because it can be the difference between whether you buy the right car for you or not.
Okay, so that brings up a great point and a great question. So we talk about documentation, right? It's obviously up to the seller to provide an auction with as much documentation as they can, right? Because that's ultimately what's going to help sell the vehicle, right? So when you if I go to an auction, I say, okay, well, here's this car, I really like it, and I'm talking to the specialist. Is there a place that I could go, and do you have documentation, physical documentation that I could see on this vehicle? So you're the specialist, Chris. Is there a place I can go and I can sit down and just look through the paperwork? Like, is that a?
That's absolutely perfect. Yeah, just what you said. They will turn around to you and say, yeah, we've got the file on the car, and hopefully, if the vendor has done a great job, they've collected everything that they can, and they've got all of that paperwork there. It's just the same as going to buy a car, from a private sale. You're hoping that the vendor has done their homework, and you can see all the service history and any receipts the vehicle's had. If there isn't a lot of paperwork there, is it the car for you? I don't know. Maybe the price will reflect it. But it's not just this car's going across the block. Should I raise my hand and bid? There's lots of things that lead up to this, and if everyone does their job, including the seller, upon delivering the vehicle to the auction house, from paperwork to them doing their job, it's like poetry in motion. It's a good thing. Sometimes it doesn't run so smooth, in which case, it's not so enjoyable. But if everyone's on the ball and it all works out, then there's no reason why it shouldn't be a pleasurable experience. And like I said to you, it's also a lifestyle experience as well. Lots of business gets done at car auctions, and you meet lots of new contacts. All of the right people are in the right place. For me, it's just an absolutely fabulous social event, as well as business, because you're putting yourself in front of, as well as other people putting themselves in front of you. And, you've got the whole car world there. You get to sit down and socialize as well. I think they're a fabulous thing.
Okay, so, and I do agree with that, obviously. So now you've got your buyer, you've got your seller. The car has been, as a buyer, you've looked at your paperwork, right? You've gone in the back room, you've checked the car out from a physical perspective and looked over every aspect in it. You decide, okay, I want to bid for this automobile. Okay. So now the next step on that is you're registering with the auction house to bid, correct? And is that something you have to do ahead of time, or is that something you can do the day of the auction? And what type of paperwork, what type of information does generally an auction need from you to qualify you as a bidder or a buyer?
Okay. Generally, auction houses are just like anyone else. Are you known to them? Do you have a previous track record with them?
Mhm.
If you are a newbie to an auction house or the auction game itself, I would say please get in touch with them 3 or 4 days before you're intending on bidding on a vehicle. You're going to need a bank letter of guarantee, possibly a credit card as well, so they can check and verify your credit history, and just generally make sure that you're not going to waste their time or the poor person that's selling the car if you're that way inclined. So once they actually know who you are, can verify you, then you'll get your bid and number assigned. Now, whether you decide to be there in person and you're holding up your card to say, this is my number and I'm bidding on it, or you're on the phone or on the internet, either way. So basically, you would do that if you was a newbie. A lot of the auction houses, once you've been 3 or 4 times and you've actually done some business with them, bringing back a bank letter, a letter of guarantee. A lot of them generally say, hey, we're okay, we've done business, we're okay, it's not a problem. Just from a point of view that if you're going to do this for the first time, I would definitely do it a few days in advance, because a lot of banks as well, some of them aren't used to giving a bank letter of guarantee, if you're in a smaller rural town or whatever, and it can actually be a process and hold you up. So yes, please leave plenty of time for that. It would be my comment to you.
So, Chris, when we talk about a bank letter of guarantee, is that, just to break it down even further, is that just a bank saying, okay, you have X amount of dollars in your account, you're verified to up to this, because I'm sure the auction house is going to verify you up to a certain amount, right? If your bank comes back and be like, you have $87 in your account, right? The auction is going to look at that and be like, well, you're obviously not free to bid on a $500,000 car.
Sure. And, everyone's got a different relationship with their bank manager. You may have $100,000 in your savings account and you want to spend $250 on a car. All you need is a letter of guarantee for the $250, because, the auction house doesn't need to know that you've got an agreement that you can get a loan of another $150 on top of it, if that's what you've decided to do with your bank. So, the letter of guarantee just gives you a shelf of what you're good up to, and remember, a lot of these auctions now, we're seeing cars going over $20 and $30 million.
Yeah.
So that letter's going to be a little bit bigger than the other ones.
Yeah.
But, it's important to know everyone's got the money, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, so now everything's in place. You bid on your car. You won your bid. You had your drinks, had a nice dinner. Okay, now it's good. Now the car is still sitting there. It's still at the auction property, right? So, and I know you've got a lot of experience with this. The next portion of it is, I'm from California. The auction took place in Jersey. What do I do now? And what is the auction house expecting from me as the buyer to do? Are they providing shipping? Are they providing logistics? Or am I just like, oh shit, do I have to just get in and drive it home now? Because how does that work?
Well, I love this part of it, because everything that we've spoke about up until this point has been very gentlemanly and very smooth flowing.
Yeah.
This is the part where the auction house wants you to get some roller skates on, because we said earlier about the overhead that these guys have on bricks and mortar, whether they're renting a facility or what have you. It all costs money. Yeah. They're there for a finite amount of time usually, and you usually get 2 to 3 days to remove your new purchase, your new pride and joy. And if you haven't done it before, then obviously you're not going to be au fait with it. So you may not have time to start calling carriers to have your vehicle and receive quotations, which can take a couple of days sometime.
Yeah.
And then, it is possible that you would be fined some form of storage fee after the clock starts ticking on the stopwatch. But generally, all auction houses have a relationship with a carrier. It's like Reliable, Passport, lots of different ones across the North America anyway, as well as Europe. But, if you are stuck, just speak to that auction specialist and say, hey, I need transportation. It is as simple as that. It may cost you more, it may cost you less, but I tell you what, it's a big headache out of the way if you do it that way.
Okay, so that's one way to do it. But what if you want to just get in and drive your car home? Can you do that?
Get after it. You own it. I mean, it's brave. Make sure you check the levels.
Okay. It's really funny. And I mean, for those that don't know, if you guys go back, at around this time last year, I was kind of hunting for a car, just to give you guys a little backstory. And I had called Chris, and I was, I'd been hunting for about a year, and I'm like, Chris, yeah, I'm looking for another Trans Am and blah, blah, blah. And I had bought this 79 Trans Am. And, Chris, just so everybody out there knows, and they could contact him at Mr. Chris or Chris Smith LLC.com. He also does procurement. So I get an email one day, and that email just says, "This is the one you buy." And I was like, shit. Because I know if that is said and, Chris says this is the one you buy, it's just like, I mean, that's just it. That's the one you buy, right? So we went through all this stuff. Chris was kind enough to go and check this car out for me. It was in Dallas, Texas. I flew to Dallas, looked at the car. We got in and literally drove it 2,000 miles back to San Francisco, California together. Had an amazing road trip and an amazing experience. It was just all sorts of fun. But that's, when we talk about buying a car at auction, like if you have that option, you could do that, right? And I think that's kind of a fun, adventurous thing to do. Just have to be prepared for what kind of adventure you're actually going to get into at some point, right? So
absolutely.
So
I think you have
let
to
me
be
ask
that
you
way
this.
inclined that you want adventure in your life if you're going to do that.
Yes, you do.
And
I totally agree. So now we have, so this last year, 2020, right, is over. Thank you, God. We're going into 2021. We're still in the time of a pandemic, right? So all of the live auctions that were supposed to take place last year were canceled. So going into the 2021 auction season, how do you think these auctions are going to move forward? Do you think we're going to, because I know so many of them have been hit so hard, they've been punched in the gut just because of gatherings, we're not allowed to have them and so on and so forth. Do you think they're going to recover? Do you think many of these auction houses are still going to be able to operate with the amount of revenue that they lost in 2020 into the 2021 season and beyond?
Absolutely, without doubt, because no matter what happens, history tells us, whether it's the auction houses or, the car gig or whatever, life goes on. And the one thing I would say, credit to them, is that, yeah, it got tough for them. It got tough for everybody. But guess what? It's 2020. We're in 2021. We diversify and we do what we have to do to start with just to get by. And then you're looking at, you're covering bills and overheads and so forth. And then you start thinking to yourself, hey, have I got enough money in the bank to ride this out? Do I need to sell my pride and joy? Well, there's one revenue stream for them because you're looking at selling a car for an auction house. Mm-hmm. So who's buying? People that are cash rich are going to be buying. I don't think it really affected them that financially negatively for too long a time. Yes, they hurt, but they're coming back and they've done a wonderful job of contactless digital sales with online auctions. Some of them were already doing it. Some of them were ahead of others as far as that was concerned. Mm-hmm. But the one thing I would say to you is it's going to be easier to go back to physical auctions because mm-hmm. they were already set up to do it and been doing it for a long time. So, with regard to COVID, we now have vaccines. People are, being vaccinated at a huge scale. And, life will go on. We will get out of this. And there will be another integration between digital online auctions and going back to physical. No one that I know wants to carry on staying in their house and doing this. I miss speaking to my friends and mm-hmm. shaking hands. Right. I miss spending time with people, and that was a big part of my life. And the last 12 months have been on hold as far as that's concerned. And I think a lot of them got, Car Week is January in Scottsdale. That's the one that sets the mood for the year globally. Pretty much a lot of them got cancelled. Some of them stayed on to do some online stuff and one or two physical on smaller scales. But March onwards of this year, we're going to see people. I actually had a mail from 4 of my friends yesterday that asked me if I wanted to book my hotel room yesterday because they're going out to Scottsdale for March. Mm-hmm. And I think the news of the pandemic with regard to the vaccine is starting to spur people and kickstart them towards wanting to attend physical auctions as well as other physical events. Life does go on. In answer to your question, yes. I think that it's a good thing. It will go back to being physical. And I think that some people will wait longer than others. Hey,
Hmm.
you know, you may not want to be at the front of the queue. Maybe if you're elderly, you don't want to do that. If you're
Sure.
younger, you know, you've got built-in immunity and what have you, then, you know, it's just common sense. But yeah, I, for one, am certainly welcoming physical auctions again, because I miss the camaraderie of seeing
Hmm.
people and also people in the industry that I know as well.
So let me ask you this. So if people want to move their cars and they want to sell their cars, so your company, can somebody, so for instance, I don't want to go to a live auction event because I just don't feel up to it, or whatever the case is. I don't want to be around crowds. Can people call you and say, hey, Chris, this is such and such. I've got this 550 Maranello that I want to sell at auction. Is that one of the things that you do? Do you act as a liaison sometimes between the auction and the seller, and will you bring cars in? So as an expert in the field, say, okay, well, Chris, could you take all my guesswork out of it and set me up with the auction house, and then take care of not only buying and selling, but then if my car is sold, all I want to do is get a check and then know my car is being shipped to the new owner.
Sure, absolutely. You know, and people have been doing this for years, companies, individuals. I've done it in the past, and you know, I'll be doing it in the future. A lot of people don't have time to come away from their high-powered jobs and so forth and get rid of their collections. They have representatives for them. You know, there's a lot of people, a lot of stars, and you know, we see on TV and film as well as pop stars and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
They have people that do this for them. You know, and I think the other side of the coin is that they'll also call me when they want to buy, because they want to know, you know, if that car is, are the numbers correct on the car? Is it original? Did it
Yeah,
leave with that engine and
sure.
transmission? You know, and it kind of leads into another side of the industry as well. So the representation that I would give them basically is basically to verify that those vehicles that they're looking at are going to be the right vehicles for them. Are they going to use them
Mm-hmm.
as a driver quality vehicle? Are they going to use them on a weekend? Are they not going to drive them? Are they going to put them in the window of their house and it's going to be an investment for the next 5 or 10 years? You know,
Right.
each car, you know, the old saying is, you know, there's an ass for every seat. What do you want to use the car for? You know, it may not be for Jeff that stood over here, but it may be for Frank that stood behind him, because Frank's need is more than Jeff's, you know. So
Right.
there's lots of variables for that person and what they want to do. So yeah, I think it's very important that the verification when purchasing the vehicle is key. So yes, it can be done from help me sell my car, you liaise. You know, there's a commission on that, which would come back to me because they haven't got time to do it. And then the other side of the coin is, Chris, you know, there's an old Porsche over here. I need to know if this is the car for me because I've been looking for 2 years. So, you know, I'll go and physically inspect the car, take my time to do that. Whether they want to stay at the auction and bid on it or not is another thing. If they want me to, then I will, because a lot of buyers don't like to be seen purchasing those cars. They don't like people knowing that they own those vehicles. It's kind of, there can be a secretive aspect to it as well. You know, they're not very public people, very private individuals. And, you know, over the years, especially in Europe, I've been privy to car collections where I didn't think these cars existed anymore. And then I walk, you know, behind closed doors because someone invited me, you know, very quietly, hush, hush, or whatever. And you know, you're in a room of sort of 40 vehicles that you just, it's actually a shame that they can't be shared with everyone, but you know, it's down to the owner. But yeah, it can be a very good thing. I enjoy what I do, and I love the verification. And I think the other side of it is that historical paperwork with vehicles, especially on older vintage cars, that is an aspect of what I do that I really enjoy, Mike. I think that you know, you look back in the 50s and you look at a 356, you look at a Mercedes like a Gullwing, and you know, by today's standard, these cars are telephone numbers. They're very desirable. Well, who had the money to buy those cars back then? That's the thing that I really enjoy researching. And a lot of people that do what I do will just look into the numbers of the car and say, you know, yeah, this has got the original gearbox in it, or, you know, that distributor shouldn't be there. This has been updated. And it's just history about physically what's sat in front of you.
Yeah.
I go after the genealogy of the people that bought that car and who they were and what they did and who owned it after them. And I try, it's very time consuming, but I build a history file for that vehicle to show its journey from inception at the factory So how it ended up in a different country did, excuse me, and then basically find out, how these people afforded them back in the day, because, a good 356, like a speedster back in the day, you're looking at Cadillac money that had power everything instead of the bathtub next to it that didn't have anything. Why would someone buy that? Who was that person? I want to know more about them. I think there was, I think it was about 2 years ago, I did a 37 Bentley. And this thing was just the best research I'd ever done. And this guy from World War One, this hero in the UK, he'd got various injuries and he'd retired as this older army dude, and bought this Bentley brand new. And I'm like, who is this guy? And it was the journey with him to a guy at a textile mill that employed half of a town. And then he transported the car to New York on a boat, drove it around New York, and then it ended up on the West Coast with someone else. Right. And it's just that I love the Unchained journey, the history that goes with it, because it tells you a lot about the people that enjoyed it previously to you. And then you start to find photos of them, and you've got this vendor, and this is incredible. It's like, who do you think you are for cars?
Right.
The
TV show.
Right. Yeah. And I really enjoy doing that. I really do. And if you can find, sometimes it doesn't work out because there isn't enough history to start with. But if you find, if you've got the warrant, Porsche are great, because back in the day they had Cardexes, which a lot of them did give a name and an address of who purchased the vehicle. And I've had instances in the past where I've had a friend of mine down the road from here had a 911 that he was sending to auction. This was about 8 years ago. And he said, I've had researchers looking at it, and I can't work out why this 911, this road-going car's got this 100-litre fuel tank. Because like a 66 911 with a 100-litre fuel tank was mainly, they were fitted to race cars for endurance. So they had less fuel stops. And he couldn't figure it out. So he says, do you want to have a stab at it? So I says, yeah, no problem. So this was when I was living in London. And about 3 hours later, I found the guy that owned the car. Not only was he still alive, he's in his 70s doing track day tuition at the Nürburgring. It was absolutely incredible. So, I did a bit more research. About 2 hours later after that, I'm talking to this guy on the phone. He's living in Wuppertal in Germany. He's like, hey, come over, come and see me. 2 days later, I went there with a buddy, sat down. He's got pictures of him with this 911 when it was delivered new.
Oh, wow.
He raced for the Kremer race team and his other, they did British touring cars. And I said to him, it was like the final thing after we're having lunch and stuff. I said, what's the story with the 100-litre tank? Did you race this car? Do you have pictures of it at the track race? Oh, no, Chris. He goes, I used to ski in Switzerland. There was no gas stations. So in order to make it, I ordered it with the larger tank so I could go skiing without stopping or carrying like a jerry can.
That's fantastic.
But you never would have known, for the previous 2 years, my friends thinking this is a race car. Sand down there'll be a number underneath under the paint on the door or whatever. And a lot of the time, it's just a super easy explanation for it.
That's very, very cool. So, Chris, we've covered auctions, we've covered history, we've covered paperwork, we've covered everything. So, if there's an individual that wants to get in contact with you, okay, everything from going to physically look at a car to possibly taking it to auction. Maybe they just want history on the vehicle that they currently own. How do they get in contact with you to use your services? Where can they find Big Chris Smith?
Sure. They can email me at chris@mrsmithllc.com, or alternatively get in touch with me through Instagram. I'm at Big Car Chris on Instagram. Those two are the main points of contact people get in touch with me with, for sure.
Okay, awesome. And I think, and just for some people out there, I mean, I've known Chris for, Jesus, a long time, well over a decade. We've raced together. We've done a bunch of stuff together. But the cool part is every time that I have a question about an engine or a car that I'm going to buy, he is my resource. And it's been really, really great. Like I said, when I bought my Trans Am, he went down and he inspected it, went through all the documentation. Is it numbers matching? Is it this? And it's just, it's a very comforting thing to have somebody who can do this, whereby you might not have the time, you might not have the energy, and you might not just have the knowledge to figure out what's what on a certain vehicle. And I can attest that all the books that are behind him right now have a lot of that information in it. So, Chris, man, it's always a pleasure, man. Thank you for coming on the barbecue. It's been great. And I don't know, any last words? Anything you want to say before we clip this?
You know what? It's been absolutely great. Always a pleasure spending time with you, buddy. And with regard to your Trans Am, it was kind of funny because the guy I actually went and got it from for you, he couldn't understand why there was a British guy stood in front of him inspecting a Trans Am. I was like, I went to school in one of these when I was 8 years old in London. He didn't even know his own car was numbers matching until I told him. You know, it's crazy.
That's great.
But always a pleasure, mate. Thank you very much for having us on. And I look forward to catching up with you soon. Hopefully at a car auction so we can have a beer.
Absolutely.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
Thanks for listening, folks. And again, please subscribe to the Hot Rod BBQ podcast. If you're on Spotify, check us out there. Subscribe to it on iTunes. And if you are going to go to YouTube, make sure you go to the Hot Rod BBQ podcast and hit that subscribe button, and we'll come to you every week.